On this episode of the Palmetto Guardian, we talk storms, and a really big storm. Welcome to this episode of the Palmetto Guardian. I'm Specialist David Erskine.
I'm Lieutenant Tracci Dorgan.
And this is the first episode of the podcast you've been on with us.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, super excited for you to be here. And we are in hurricane season.
Came earlier this year.
Already
had one.
But we're good at this. We're good at this. We're getting
response, yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're getting good at this.
Yeah, 5 years in a row.
Yeah, maybe a little too much practice. But you know, we're here. That's what we do.
Yep.
It's fine. I mean, they keep coming, and we'll keep going.
That's it.
That's
plain and simple.
Now, for you, a little bit different. If y'all don't know, Lieutenant Dorgan works with us full time here in public affairs, but that's not what you do on M-Day side.
No. I am in the 178th Field Artillery.
Okay. Which, that makes things a little bit different when storms come around, yeah?
Yeah, because I don't take pictures and write stories about it. I was battle captain just for this last one. I was in charge of where 200 people were going throughout the day. Traffic control points, high water vehicle rescues, you name it. I was sending people out on missions to take care of the civilians in the, Mullins area.
Oh yeah, so you were down in one of those areas that it can get
Floods.
it can get rough at.
Yes.
Unfortunately, Mullins and that area, especially over the last, like I said, 5 years or so, has gotten hit pretty heavy. But that's an interesting thing about the Guard is, especially for the full-time force, and it also applies to the M-Day soldiers because Monday through Friday they might be a vet tech or something, and when they come in, they're a heavy equipment operator.
Right.
And kind of the same thing for you. Monday through Friday, you're up here, doing photos and writing stories and community relations, whatever. All that is involved in the public affairs world. And then when a storm like that comes, you're doing a completely different job, a whole different way.
Yes.
That's a quick. I mean, that's.
Yep. Snap.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah. That just. I mean, I think that just goes. I guess the testimony of National Guard
Of the
people.
National Guard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just what we do. Whether you're a civilian or you Monday through Friday work for the Guard, you still switch the button and
Yeah.
you're doing your domestic operations missions. So
Yeah. And so, little applauds for all of our Guard folks, Air and Army side out there. South Carolina, we might be the best at it, but we're going to give a little shout out to everybody out there that does this. Just a little friendly chat between ourselves and the other National Guard units out there.
but we're the best.
But we're the best. No, we're not going to pick bones about it. But anyway, but now for me, I do this Monday through Friday, and I do similar during the storm. So not a whole lot of change for me. Last year it changed a little bit. I went down to the jock area and worked indoors, which was a change for me.
Right.
It wasn't necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's just where they needed me, and I went. So I got to learn a whole new side of public affairs
Yeah.
during the storm. And so now, was this your first year doing the battle captain thing for the storms?
No. Last year I was on night shift. This year I was on day shift. But,
So you got a raise.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, look at
Yes,
that.
A lot more happens during the day. We kind of tone things down at night for safety reasons.
Right.
Of course, in emergency, we're sending people out, but it's just safer to go out when you can see the stuff.
Right.
Because, even though, we have high water vehicles, they can still only go in about 2 feet of water. And once the road is beyond 2 feet of water, we don't know where the edge is.
Right.
So daytime is best to travel.
That's right.
But before that, I was also, since my unit knows I'm public affairs, I've done their public affairs, handled when media came to check us out and take pictures of our soldiers and done that kind of thing. So I've kind of played both roles in field artillery, but it's always, we're on the reaction side instead of the covering side, so it's a different aspect.
Yeah, and that's some people might say, "Oh, that's terrible. That type of stuff happens." But leadership's really good in the Guard if they know that you have multiple talent sets. They're going to get the most out of it. As the person that they're getting the most out of, sometimes you're like, "Oh no," but at the same time, they're utilizing it to make the situation more efficient for the citizens
Right.
of South Carolina and the nation,
Right.
depending on the incident and what's going on. So. And we've talked about that before. Any job, you got your I'm dying here. I need a break. But we always press through. And we always make sure the mission's accomplished, and we're trying to do the best for the citizens, the soldiers, the airmen. Everybody involved in a situation like that. Super interesting though that you kind of have that talent set and it's utilized like that, and the fact that you get to see both sides of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I guess, are like that. Mine's a little bit more straightforward, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I don't know. It's got some pros and cons. Sometimes, like, hey, I want to get out and go do and see and rummage around and help and be there, on the front line, as it were, during a natural disaster and helping people. But the public affairs side of things is still important.
Still a pretty cool job.
Everybody that's involved in the storm has an important job. Like the mass amount of clockwork and machinery that comes out in these situations.
Yeah.
It's not just a simple everybody scatter to the corner of the state and figure out what you're doing.
Yeah, we mobilized more than 1,000 soldiers in less than a day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, because honestly, I didn't know until you just said it a few minutes ago that you were the battle captain over the soldiers, these airmen and things like that. How do you go into that? I mean, because there's got to be a little bit of stress, and especially because that's a real steep change from your Monday through Friday. I mean, it's a steep change.
Right. Unfortunately, it's not our first hurricane, so there's already standard operating procedures. You know that you're going to be tracking so many units, so many personnel, and you just keep a list, a running tally kind of thing. I got 80 general purpose troops, and I got 70 out on a mission. I got 10 available. I have 3 Humvees and a LMTV. What other kind of mission can I support? You need a high water? All right, we got 2 soldiers and an LMTV. Go. You got the tally. It's down to a science.
And like you said, that's unfortunate that we've had that many storms. But what is really great about that point is that we have learned.
Yes.
And we've made this better, which means we get to life-saving operations faster.
Yes. We're all staged, ready to go before the storm. We're there. Storm hits. We're out there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And a lot of that started way back when, and really we're upon the anniversary of it was Hurricane Hugo, and it was one of the storms that kind of devastated the South Carolina area, and it really did affect how we do business in South Carolina as far as storms. Yeah. And we've continued to evolve.
Lessons learned, always.
Always. And, that, like I said, that was such a devastating storm. Not to say there haven't been others since then, but really that was one of the first ones where we're like, hey,
right.
we need to look at this in a different way, and we've constantly evolved every time, which is great.
Yes.
Because every time we evolve, it just makes it that much easier on the citizens, and we, hopefully we protect as much life and property as we can, along with, obviously everything that we're talking about is really dictated and moved forward by our civil authorities in the area, i.e. your cops, your firemen, police force, sheriff department, SLED,
right.
governor, and all that. I mean, really, we're there to aid them and,
right.
and gap fill where they need us to.
Right.
We don't go out and just say, hey, we're going to start doing this. They call us. And now, as a battle captain, you're dealing with the taskers and
yeah.
that type. So you're very familiar with.
So we send out our high water vehicles with fire departments. They're actually, the soldiers and the vehicles go to that fire department and reside there for any number of days required. And that's it. They're kind of tasked off to the fire department. And then our traffic control points, they're tasked off to the local police department or sheriff's department. So I'm still tracking them where all my personnel are, but they're really on order for that mission at that fire department or at that police department. So we don't move unless it's come from fire department, police department, governor. It's all for them.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to tell you who our special guest is today, but he has been on the show before. But we actually were able to get him back on because he actually has a very unique story about where he was during Hugo, and he talks a little bit, or I know from talking to him about the situation, that he kind of has a similar thing where Monday through Friday this and flipped over. So you don't have to wait much longer. I don't think I'm gonna stall it any longer to get into it, but we'll jump over to our special guests and talk with them and a little bit about Hurricane Hugo. We're here today talking with Major General Van McCarty, the Adjutant General for South Carolina, and he's going to talk with us about his experience during Hurricane Hugo back in 1989. So thank you for taking time out of your day and stopping by.
Thank you.
So where were you? What were you doing September 1989 during Hurricane Hugo?
Well, like most South Carolinians, I was anxiously waiting to see what Hurricane Hugo may look like as it related to the impact it could have on the state of South Carolina. We definitely knew there was a strong hurricane that was heading our way, but like many hurricanes, you can't predict exactly where landfall is going to be until you get within about a 72-hour frame. And so we were sitting back waiting, but as we began to see that landfall looked to be pretty imminent, and it looked to be pretty imminent with a strong size storm. Hurricane Hugo had reached Category 5, which is the highest level of storm that you can have. There was a lot of anxiety and a lot of concern over not only what it may do to the life and safety of the citizens of the great state of South Carolina, but what it would also have in terms of an economic impact. But I was at the time, an M-Day soldier, which I currently am, but I worked for the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. I was a wildlife officer. At the time, though, I was currently assigned to Governor Campbell's security detail. So I was anxiously working between the two positions, trying to keep an eye on my focus as part of his security detail, but I was also watching to see how I may be, if I would, be utilized by the National Guard. So it was an interesting time in leading up to that fateful day of September the 22nd, which I think most South Carolinians, certainly those of my age group, remember quite well.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on something there that not only applied back then for your situation, but still applies to soldiers nowadays. But that whole pull between the M-Day and your civilian duties. Yes. So when everything kind of started kicking off, where did you find yourself initially in that process?
Well, we had then, and we still have today, basically an understanding with all our state law enforcement agencies that any guardsmen that work for a state agency or a local law enforcement first responder type, their first responsibilities and their first obligations are to their employer. We've tried to utilize that as recently as Hurricane Florence this past year. So I was looking to stay with DNR at that point and stay assigned, as I said earlier, with my duties for the governor's security detail. But that proved not to quite unfold entirely as we went on into the storm. But certainly I was in contact with my unit. I was the battery commander at Alpha Battery at that time, the 4th of the 178th Field Artillery, headquartered the battalion in Georgetown, so we knew and felt like it was going to certainly be impacted, but my battery is located and still is today in Andrews, South Carolina.
Okay. Now, you're part of the 178th or have been part of the 178th, right?
Currently am, yes.
Currently
Bravo Battery, first to 178.
Okay. Now, isn't that kind of interesting that, field artillery folks, you wouldn't really think that going into a hurricane that y'all would get utilized like that. So where did you, I guess kind of what becomes y'all's discommission, and especially something as big as Hugo?
Sure. Well, in the big scheme of things today, we look at all of our soldiers and all our airmen as being potential assets in support of our discommission, the defense support of our civilian authorities. And we, right now today, are watching a storm that's still days away and thousands of miles away, and don't know what its impacts could be on South Carolina, but we're already watching it. That's Tropical Storm Dorian. But that's much like we were doing, 30 years ago with, at that time, in its early infancy, a tropical storm that later became a hurricane, which we now know as Hurricane Hugo, which still is one of the largest hurricanes that's ever impacted the state of South Carolina in terms of loss of life and economic damage to the state. And we today, as then, look to prepare ourselves each and every year for potential response to these type of events. So our soldiers, I would expect all of them today to look around and make sure that I have my to-go bag ready in case I get that call, just as I would have done 30 years ago. And unfortunately, here over the last about 6 years, we've had a lot of experience with that here in South Carolina. So that has helped our proficiency in terms of our ability to respond, but obviously it has come with a tremendous cost.
Oh yeah. It's a tough way to practice, unfortunately. Yes. Now you mentioned you were part of the governor's security detail. Now that's kind of an interesting perspective leading into a storm, especially when it turns out to be Hugo, and it was such a large event. How did some of that play, or what was some of the things maybe you got to see from that perspective that you wouldn't normally get to see?
Sure. Well, Governor Campbell was a very dynamic and inspiring leader. I enjoyed my time around the governor and the First Lady and the entire First Family. They were very cordial, and they loved the state of South Carolina, and he, as the governor, loved serving the citizens of the great state of South Carolina. He was also a very avid outdoorsman, and as a young wildlife officer, he was quite involved with hunting, fishing, and other activities. At the time, the security detail, and even today, was composed of generally sled agents and members of our state highway patrol. But wanting to be inclusive of other larger state law enforcement agencies, he reached out to DNR and requested to have a couple DNR officers. And I had only been on for about 2.5 years, and my wife and I were, along with our son, were living in Charleston where I was assigned. And the opportunity to come on the detail was presented to me, and both my wife and I were from Columbia originally, although we were happy living in Charleston. She still tells me today that was some of our happiest days, and I hear quite often that I moved her from one of her favorite schools. She was a school teacher. But no, we relocated back to Columbia where our home was, and worked for the governor on the detail, and had some great exposure there. Traveling with him to many places in this state and many places in this country, and I did some overseas travel with him. But I think the time that was certainly spent with him and his administration around Hugo brings back some good memories, mixed also obviously with the reality of what we went through as a state.
All right, so I'm gonna take advantage of this situation and talk about something, especially the fact that you're a DNR officer, that I'm hugely into, because I do a lot of wildlife stuff, and we take a trip down to Santee, Persimmon Island down there, and we camp every Thanksgiving for the past 60 years. But I think a lot of times with these storms, and especially something as big as Hugo, we obviously, the effect to human life is obviously utmost importance. But we talk a lot post about the economy and, roads being out, but you get to see, or you were able to see, a perspective of it, what it did to our wildlife. Sure. And natural areas here. You want to touch on that maybe a little bit, because that's a unique perspective.
Yeah. Well, a storm as large and had the magnitude and the potential for destruction of a Hugo has potentially huge impacts, and it did in South Carolina. Obviously, the economy was hit very difficult. The storm made landfall on the night of the 22nd, just between Charleston and Sullivan's Island. which really the way a hurricane with the way the storm force winds circulate, a lot of the brunt of the storm winds and surge went a little north of Charleston into the McClellanville area and hit the National Forest area in that area. Tremendously devastating that not only that economy, but that had a huge impact on the landscape of the natural resources, i.e. the trees and impact. And I think even today there's still some evidence of what impact Hugo has, although most of that has long since been regrowth. But it had not only an impact in terms of the physical damage, it had also an impact, I think, mentally and emotionally for those that lived through and stayed during Hurricane Hugo. The wildlife, obviously, Mother Nature has built in their defense mechanisms, and wildlife are generally pretty adaptable to these type of things. I guess they have a sense that something is not quite right, and they will move to take shelter. But unfortunately, a storm of that magnitude, that really, when you look at Hurricane Hugo on a map, it covered most of the state of South Carolina, at least in its outer band strength. So there's no way to have escaped that, and to put a true number on the impact to the natural resources would be difficult. But it certainly had an impact, not only on the resource immediately, but in the environment in which they had lived. I mean, the forest in many cases was simply blown down along the coast there around McClellanville. So a huge impact. It had a significant impact on the commercial fishery industry in South Carolina. If you recall back and see even today of pictures where whole fleets of fishing boats were rafted together on land, and it just devastated in many cases the fishing industry. Many did come back, but it took quite a while, and for some it may have been an experience that was just unrecoverable from. But the people of South Carolina proved then, and have proved since then, to be very, very resilient. They come together, they work together to address these type of issues. I think it's the time when you see a bonding of citizens that transcends any kind of barriers that you may have, whether it's racial, gender, socioeconomic background. Those type of events tend to pull people together, and we see the best in those situations. And I think Hurricane Hugo was one that helped bring out the best in many South Carolinians.
I was actually, 89. I was 10 years old at that point in time. So what would have been third grade ish. Yeah. I remember going to school under candlelight. I went to a private school, and they were like, "We don't care if the power's out. Everybody in. This is a great learning opportunity to kind of see everything going on as it was happening and stuff like that." Now, were you, because you're not,
I was still living in California.
you were still in California.
I knew nothing of Hugo.
So this was a blip. And so a lot of this stuff is new to you. You're learning.
It really is, yes.
So that's pretty interesting, though. The fact that you were in California. Obviously South Carolina we were reeling, but over there, But now you moved here.
Now I moved here, and I've lived through 6 hurricanes just in the past 6 years.
So yeah, you're
been called to every single one of them. Yeah, it's.
So you're learning.
I'm learning.
You're
quickly.
learning. Wow.
Yes.
Now you did mention the community and stuff pulling together during that time, and I was fortunate enough working in video. Obviously, at 10 years old, I wasn't involved with the Guard, but I've been able to go through some of our archive footage. Mm-hmm. And we actually have some interviews and stuff with the shop owners and things like that, and they were ecstatic the fact that we were down there. How, for some of the soldiers that might be new to the Guard who haven't been here the past 6 years, who haven't gone through a hurricane with us yet, I mean, it's devastating. It's terrible to watch this happen to your community, but having gone through them, there is a certain, I guess, sense of pride. That you're out there and you see the community. Talk to me a little bit about how that was 30 years ago.
Okay. Well, kind of set the stage for that just a little bit. The day before Hurricane Hugo made impact, I was with the governor. We were on the coast. He was doing some pre-storm visits there with some local government and trying to ensure that we were prepared, and wanted to reassure all those that were going to be potentially impact that the state of South Carolina was going to be there, and we would do all that we could in the recovery process as quickly as we could. So we were spent the night in the Conway area and then moved back on into Columbia for what ultimately was the storm that made impact again on the night of the 22nd. Rode out the storm at the State House, and then the next day, when the weather permitted, I remember taking off in an old Dodge Ram Charger that was assigned to our detail. It was the most appropriate vehicles that we had, and I had thrown some just supplies in the back of it, and had a saw and some other equipment. I wasn't sure what we were going to face, what I was going to face, and my goal and my mission was to get to the coast to meet him to do some of the initial surveys of storm damage. So moved out and quickly found the goodness of people of the state of South Carolina as I was trying to get down what I had traveled many times, that road network to the coast. Didn't resemble what I could remember. To have told somebody to go to a certain location and you will see such and such there, it wasn't necessarily like that. The devastation, even as far as inland in the Sumter area in which the storm moved on up through the state up into Charlotte, but there was quite a bit of devastation. I would have never could have imagined what I was seeing, but the local people were already out. They were working to help clear the roads. There were power lines down, there were trees down, there was debris everywhere, but people were actively trying to do at that point what you would just consider to be the health and welfare checks. Can I get to such and such house to check on either a relative or a close friend? So I was working my way through that and started really, to readily see the impact of people taking ownership of a situation long before the authorities could get there and begin that process. So that again has replayed itself out during the flood of 15 and during Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence that people are really our first responders in the local citizens. Got down to the coast and again just could not have imagined the degree of devastation that I saw. And I can remember some of the amazing things that I saw traveling within the days or so after the storm on Highway 17, and you saw the forest again, great destruction, the trees knocked over. And then I came to a place, there was a house across the street and huge pine trees and other trees all across the yard, and kind of catty-corner across 17 was like a roadside market that had kind of a structure of a steel frame or conduit pipe that had plastic and so over, and it had little fruit hanging baskets and so forth, and it looked like nothing had been touched. Just some of those situations that you just can't imagine how did that happen. Yeah. And then go to fast forwarding just a little bit, and was coming back into Georgetown from 17 back towards Myrtle Beach, coming back in. At that time, we did not have phones like we have today, but I did have a pager, and my pager went off and had the governor in the front seat next to me, and I glanced down and I looked at my pager and I recognized the number. It was from my guard unit. And he said, "Somebody trying to get in touch with you?" And I said, "Yes, sir, it's all right, though. I can get back with him." He said, "Is it your unit?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir, it is." And I said, "But I'll get back in touch with him." He said, No. He said, "We're this close. Let's at least go to Georgetown." He said, "We can check on the armories and you can check on how things were." And I remember saying, "Well, sir, how did you know that?" And he said, "I am the governor. I do know some things." So it was kind of interesting. And I said, "Well, I will probably need to stay with you, and I'm sure they've got plenty of resources." And he said, "No." He said, "Your duties are to your unit and to the citizens of the state of South Carolina." He said, I can take care of myself. And obviously we had others that could help get him. But that was a transition for me. I got him back to Columbia, and then I, again, had my bags packed, and I worked my way down to the unit in Andrews, and then my unit, along with the battalion, were mobilized, and we went to McClellanville and spent the better part of a week and a half in McClellanville. And again, saw the goodness of people out checking on neighbors, checking on family, devastated by the storm. Houses completely gone from the foundations in areas that people lived and worked were totally changed. And but you saw people that were, first of all, thankful to have survived the storm, but had a spirit of we will recover from this type attitude. Obviously, it was a long time in recovery for many, but seeing the goodness and the spirit of people working together, unit was there, and we were assigned. There was a Marine Corps unit that came in and helped assist in debris removal and cleanup. But just a memory, and I was again a captain. My focus at that time was on my battery. Yes, today I have a lot wider vision of the operation, but at that time as a captain, my focus was on the small town of McClellanville and my battery, and making sure that my soldiers were executing their mission and doing as much as we could to help the citizens of the town of McClellanville and the local area.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up too. And I was kind of thinking about that while you were talking. I was like, you're one of the few people that have that opportunity, that you got to see things, like you said, from a captain's perspective 30 years ago, and now you have to look at it, from this perspective. That's got to be, I guess, what lessons were learned from that captain to this point. How does that influence, General McCarty's decisions?
Well, I think Hurricane Hugo, and we commonly talk this as we prepare for our storms, we use it as kind of our benchmark. When I say we, the entire state of South Carolina, as it relates to the emergency management personnel. Our current director of our state emergency management division, Kim Stinson, along with his staff, they look each and every year to prepare for that next big storm. And Hugo is one that still is in the back of many of their minds, because many of them lived through it in some capacity, worked through it in some capacity. But it is kind of that point of where South Carolina really transitioned in how we looked at our storm preparation. It went to a great extreme of asking us what more can we do to prepare for that next big one. From a soldier's perspective, whether you're a captain as I was then, or as the adjutant general now, I think one of the biggest things you still want to focus on is how do we execute the mission and take care of our people, whether it's with 100 and whatever our numbers were. We were probably about 100 soldier strength unit deployed for that mission, to having deployed over 4,200 in some of the most recent storms. You want to make sure you've got your mission defined. That's one thing I've found over the years. If you give a soldier or an airman a clearly defined mission and give them the resources, they tend to get the job done and get the job done quite well. So we need to focus on that. We want to make sure that our storm preparation, our plans are thoroughly vetted and that they're rehearsed, and we do rehearsals each year, rock drills to prepare for that. But nothing obviously ever can substitute for actual implementation from the recent storms that we've had, and going back and certainly to Hugo. But we look at our performance hopefully in a very honest and critical way to see what we did well, what we may have not done so well, and then what we can do to improve. And then, like anything else that we do as a military, from that after action report, we put it into our operating procedures, and then we exercise those to build that proficiency that will allow us to hopefully learn and gain and get better from our past experiences.
You're really good at this, because I was I was thinking about asking a question or bringing up the point of why we do remember Hugo. A lot of people or areas and people who didn't live through it might think it's odd that we do, a remembrance or an anniversary to to a storm. Like I said, I was only 10 at the time, and I saw how it, just affected my neighborhood and stuff, and didn't really understand the storm as a large scale. I mean, like I said, I was only 10. Obviously, you went through it from a very different perspective, but like you said, it kind of became a benchmark for us. And then not only that, we talked about the fact that the people coming together in South Carolina and stuff. And so this is kind of why we do remember, and we take time out, during this part of the year to talk about Hugo as a storm. Is such a big event. Now, do y'all have anything like that in California? Just out of curiosity.
Anything like?
Do y'all have a remembrance of like a big event, y'all have been more like earthquake?
Yeah, there's been so many earthquakes. I think we'll always remember the San Francisco quake. I think it was of 89. I'll see.
It was a bad year for.
Because it was during the World Series.
Yep.
So
that was
we'll all
the
remember.
A's, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the A's. Yeah, I remember that. Big baseball fan. So yeah, y'all do have, and
But I don't. But I wasn't in the National Guard in California, so I don't know if we would have something that the National Guard would remembrance of this, like we do for Hugo. So I have no comparison.
Huh, interesting.
We do have the wildfires too, which is every year.
Yeah. So that's good though. It's good to remember these kind of key points and things. I want to go back to one quick thing, and you mentioned the EMD and kind of our partners and stuff. Obviously, Hugo, and you mentioned not having cell phones and things like that, but how the organizing, because obviously now I won't say it's easier, but communication wise it is easier. I mean, we can pick up and call from wherever we're at during the state, but bringing all these entities together during Hugo and you kind of being around the governor and then back to your unit, how did you see all that working?
Well, again, my perspective of it was then and would be today significantly different from how I saw things. I had a unique, again, situation. I was an employee of DNR. I was a wildlife officer, but I was also a member of the Guard. And I was in a situation where even though I was activated, mobilized to support, I still had what I felt was some obligations to my role at DNR. And so I actually had my state-assigned vehicle down with me, which afforded me much better communications, at least with the outside world, than I would have had just simply using the radios that we had at a battery-type level. Again, we were not and would not have had at that time, nor even today, some of the systems that will allow you the strategic communications that would give you access to be able to talk from one side of the county to the other, one side of the state to the other, around the world. So we were at a little bit of a disadvantage then, but we had trained for that type of environment, much like we train for today. You train to the capabilities that you have, and you look to overcome any kind of shortcomings or challenges that you had with communication. We would, if we needed to be able to communicate at a distance that we didn't have the capability of, we would have sent basically a relay out, and that could have been a physical device that we would have put out to help relay that signal transmission, or as I've done many a times, both in that kind of capability or situation and in preparation to execute our federal mission, you just send somebody out in a Jeep or a Humvee with a radio, and they listen to take the message and they pass it on. So you find ways to overcome those kind of capability shortages that you may have. But I remember, still getting information. Although the McClellanvilles were really significantly impacted. Obviously, a city like Charleston, though, that didn't see quite the destruction that it could have received if the storm would have made landfall south of Charleston, but it still was significantly impacted. And a lot of resources did go to Charleston, and I never, I know that some of the locals were a little bit, discouraged to put out about how when they had lost everything. But again, as a young captain with a very narrow focus, my job was to how can I help and how can my soldiers help the people of the McClellanville area stand back up. And the first thing that we were focused on, though, was to account for people. That was a significant challenge early on. I mean, when houses were totally taken off their foundations and gone, and trying to account for people, it took a while that we could say that we have accounted for all the people that were in our area of operation by way of either talking directly with family members or the local government to be able to cross-level what they were in one of the local schools was used as a shelter along Highway 17. But one of the local schools right there in McClellanville was actually a storm shelter that nearly proved to be a tremendous disaster. The surge waters were much higher than anyone had expected. The flood waters in the school rose almost to the level of the ceiling. And I recall talking to the locals that were at the school there, and they had no idea if they were going to be able to survive that storm or not. And at that moment, there was no relief in sight. I mean, they were there on their own, riding the storm out. And so, having heard those kind of stories, and again, seeing firsthand, and you could see on the wall where that water level rose to, and I remember stories being told of they took the smaller children and took the ceiling tiles out and pushed them up as high, and again, not knowing if that was going to be enough. Living through that type of uncertainty and certainly, I'm sure, still today brings back memories, and not pleasant memories, but memories to those individuals that would be different from most residents of the state of South Carolina as it relates to Hurricane Hugo. I mean, truly not knowing if you're going to survive a storm has got to be a very impactful moment in one's life. In riding in the area afterwards, it was common to see a number of areas around graveyards where caskets had floated, which is not all that uncommon in a storm event. But I remember a house where a large car, and in my mind I'm thinking it was a Cadillac, I cannot say for sure, but a large car that would have been driven straight into the garage or a carport-like area was turned totally sideways and was fit in with I believe the back, the bumper was facing the door of the house and the front facing the outward side.
Yeah.
And couldn't really see any damage to the vehicle. And it had a couple inches on the front, a couple inches on the back. Probably even a trained wrecker operator couldn't have gotten in there without tearing up something. But
Storm laid it right in there for 'em.
and then talking to a family, and they knew the house was shaking and violently shaking, but didn't know until the floodwaters rescinded and the winds stopped and the sun came out, and realized that they weren't where they had started. The house had totally come off the foundation and had been moved quite a ways away into that type of surprise. And you just certainly know that the power of a storm and then the effects were just unimaginable to many of those people. And certainly we saw some of the effects afterwards, but kind of unique to those situations. And certainly today we live the same thing. A lot of our units are headquartered along the coast, and many of those same soldiers in Hurricane Hugo do the same thing as our soldiers do today. When these storms blow, they tell their employers, they tell their family, I'll check on you as I can, but I've got to go and do my job. And some we find after each storm maybe have lost everything they own, and they continue to try to soldier on. And that's the kind of people that we certainly have in our organization today, both in our Army and our Air Guard. And I think it's pretty much that way in every state and in every branch of our military. They're there to do their job, and they're impacted by these events, but they want to stay focused on their job. And we had soldiers then that lost everything, but stayed on and did the job until it was an opportunity to relieve them to go and take care of their own personal losses. But it's, again, the good from the bad that impacts us, and the good comes from how well people come together and persevere, and in some cases thrive through these type of events after they survive, they begin to thrive on helping each other and seeing the goodness that we can have from that kind of kindred spirit of working together.
Yeah, and that's what we've seen. That's what we've continued to see, and I was just bred into South Carolina folks. Well, sir, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm glad you took time out your busy schedule to come by and sit with us. You're welcome back for anything. I mean, this is your show, all intents and purposes. We run it. You're the boss of it. So anytime you want to come back by, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. And just want to thank again all of our young men and young women who serve in our great Army and Air National Guard. Appreciate the sacrifices they make each and every day. We've got a number of soldiers and airmen that are either deployed now in country or will be here shortly. That's always a time that brings around quite a bit of anxiety for family and friends of those deployed. We'll just ask everyone to continue to hold them in their thoughts and prayers. And as we move into another storm season, let's make sure that we're prepared ourselves so that we can respond accordingly if we're asked to do so. And let's don't forget, we're not just a state that potentially has hurricanes to deal with. We do have a significant earthquake fault zones that run through our state, and we've had a number of ice and winter-related storms. I know that our friends from the northern states would laugh when we talk about our winter storms, but for us they are a challenge because we're not as prepared for them. But there are other things. But again, our people respond, and I just want to thank them for that willingness to do so in their service to this great nation, this great state. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Cool.
So it was really awesome to have TAG come back in and speak with us, especially about his situation during Hugo. I mean, it's super unique. I mean, he was DNR. He's on the governor's staff. I mean, Annie's in the Guard. You can't ask to get any more tied up in a storm situation than that.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was doing his Monday through Friday. Obviously the governor said it was okay for him to go do his military duty stuff, but it just shows once again, like we were talking about you with the 178 thing. Monday through Friday, because he was artillery. He's artillery too. Same general area down through there, Georgetown, all Low Country area, and all that kind of stuff. But just I'm with you, sir. I'm here because my job DNR says I'm here and whatever else. And he's like, nah, you got to go put on the uniform and boo bang. And
and that's the great thing about our employer supporters out there. I mean, without our wonderful employers of our civilians, of our M-Day soldiers, we couldn't do our jobs. So I just want to big shout out to the employers of all of our M-Day personnel.
Yeah. Super supportive. They always have been. They hopefully will continue to be. And like Lieutenant Dorgan said, thank you for it. But like we said, we are in hurricane season.
Yeah. We have already another podcast about hurricane with Derek Becker from the Emergency Management Division, so make sure you catch that.
Yeah, go check that out. And it's got some safety tips, tricks, and whatever else in there that you might want to look at before hurricane season gets going. But I don't think there's really much more to say about the situation. The story was great from the TAG. Go watch the other one to find out some of the safety stuff.
Right.
Hurricane season's not done yet.
Nope.
So, make sure you're safe. Make sure you're safe going into it. And so that's going to be it for today's episode. I'm Specialist David Erskine.
And I am Lieutenant Tracci Dorgan.
And we'll catch you in the next episode.